Do you ever feel like you're just moving through the motions, trying to pray, work, and love well, but wondering if any of it really matters? Today's conversation will help you lift your eyes beyond the noise and remember what it means to live in the light of eternity. If you've been craving peace, purpose, and a fresh sense of God's presence in your everyday life, then this one is for you. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Persistence in Prayer podcast hosted by Catholic mindset coach, wife, mother, educator, and speaker Caeli Catholic. Caeli is passionate about helping you deepen your relationship with God through the power of prayer. This podcast is a space for high achievers who want to do it all, but also want to prioritize their spiritual life and grow in faith. Join us as we explore the beauty of persistence in prayer and the transformative impact it can have on our lives. Get ready to discover practical tips, insights, and inspiration to help you develop a daily prayer practice and cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's plan for your life. Let's journey together towards a more fulfilled and faithful life as we invite the Holy Spirit in. Let's begin. Today, I'm joined by special guest Ava Frecker. She is a Midwestern writer with a heart for supporting people's stories. She's the editor and founder of Caeli Catholic, a communal blog that encourages people to live in the light of eternity. Ava spends nap times writing, editing, and sharing reflections that invite readers to slow down and see God in the ordinary. She's a Jane Austen enthusiast, chai tea addict, grammar activist, and amateur sourdough baker, and a dear friend of St. Therese, on whose feast day she married her beloved husband, Dominic. Together, they share life with their sweet boy, Linus. Ava, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Caeli.
I am excited to chat. I know you're an avid reader, and people who listen to this podcast know I love all things books of all types. So I love having other book junkies on here. What's your current read of the moment? Or are you one of those people who reads multiple books at the same time?
I go back and forth, whether I'm dabbling or head down in one book. Right now I'm dabbling. And besides spiritual reads, like I'm trying to read The Secret of the Rosary by, I think it's Louis de Montfort, since it's the month of the Rosary right now in October. But my fun read has been a new series by, I think, a Catholic author just based on the themes of it. But the book is called Wormwood Abbey. And if you like fantasy and Jane Austen and things like that, but also rooted in like classical literature and fantasy, it's been a wild, beautiful ride. And I'm just wondering why it took me this long to find this fun little read. So
Amazing. I'm going to have to look it up.
it's been great. So I think it's for younger, like young adult readers primarily, but I'm recommending it to everyone.
You're
I
enjoying
feel
it.
like it's in the same line of fiction of Tolkien and Lewis where there's that fantasy meets reality, but it's been beautiful. So
Something that can take us out of our current environment for a little bit to just imagine and believe.
exactly. We need that.
Yes, that was actually one of the things when I was teaching. I felt like my imagination had just gone so stagnant. I lost that creativity piece because there was no time to just read fun books. And then I tried to go play with my kids, and I'm like, I just can't. It was so hard. And so I think getting back to just fictional reading has helped me. But it also helps in our prayer life because being able to activate that imagination when we go to prayer is so helpful too. So it's not a waste of time if you're someone who thinks, I don't have time to go read books for fun. It's not a waste of time. It helps in your prayer life too.
I think that's a great point. I think it can be difficult to bridge that gap between prayer and imagination because I think so many of us think that they have to be in separate categories. And I think that's something that we should all be challenged to try a bit more.
Absolutely. So you have a blog called Caeli Catholic. The word Caeli means heaven, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's something so grounding about that we are meant to live with heaven in mind in the middle of our everyday. And you describe your mission as helping people to live in the light of eternity. So I just want to start with that. What does that phrase mean to you personally? And how does it shape the way that you live out your day to day?
Part of what led to the name was just finding so many quotes by the saints that spoke about eternity. One that really grounded me was St. Louis Martin, so St. Therese's father. He had it written on his wall, eternity draws nigh, and do we think of it? And that really struck me because by the time I started Caeli, I had already been in the editing Catholic sphere for a number of years. And it's one thing to think about Catholicism and living as a Catholic day in, day out, and trying to do it well. But then it's really easy to just crowd our lives and not actually think about heaven during the day and
Mhm.
think about God outside of the checklist that we create for ourselves that can become our prayer routine. And I just really liked how so many saints spoke about eternity in their writing, in their letters to family members, in their diaries, and realized that I needed to think about it a lot more than I did. And so I just decided to name it something that would remind me of heaven more often. And I hope it's working.
Yeah, I love that name. And eternity, like you said, I think it's something that we forget about if we aren't intentional. There's a book called 40 Weeks, and I'm forgetting the name of the author. He's a priest. It's been a struggle for me to get through it, but it's really good. It's really, really good. It's just taken me a long time because my brain after 40 weeks, I'm like, oh, I need to start something new instead of sticking with the thing that I'm already on. But throughout that book, it's really taking it slowly and implementing the practice of every single day praying with 5 themes. And so it's creation, like that the Lord continues to create in us. We are part of creation. Presence, always just being grounded that we are in the presence of God in this very moment. Memory, like trusting that every part of our sacred story is stored in our memory, and every part that we need to access, the Lord will give us the grace to access. So, wounds that need to be healed, moments of joy, all of those things are stored in our memory. Mercy, and then the last one is eternity. And that's been really helpful for me. But like you said, if we aren't intentional about it, if we just push it off to the side and don't really think about it. So, I'm curious, do you have any reminders maybe in your home or something that helps you? I guess just maybe even when you go to edit, you probably think about eternity. Do you have any tips for helping us remember to keep eternity at the forefront of our mind?
That's a great question. I feel like I've already indicated this, but I'm definitely a quotes person. I love having quotes in my mind that other people have said, saints particularly. And so I've been wanting to continue decorating my house. We moved a couple years ago, and I actually got pregnant right as we were moving. So much of the unpacking did not happen very efficiently. And even in that time, my style has changed. And so now I'm wanting to put a little bit more of those reminders on the wall and different quotes by saints. I have a few about, but I want to be able to incorporate that a bit more. And I know plenty of people do even the more simple route. It doesn't have to be pretty looking every single time. Have a sticky note, have it as the wallpaper on your phone. I've done that. But I think just having visual reminders is very important because we are material beings. Being able to see something, being able to touch something, have it just be around you is very important instead of, yeah, if you're not surrounded by it, you're not going to think about it. I'm sure most of your listeners probably have a crucifix in their house at least. And I think that should be the bare minimum. And that should be something we should be able to inspire in others, our children, and the people who walk in our house. This is what is at the center of our lives, even if we're not speaking about it every second. But having those visual reminders is definitely one of the most, I think, significant things you can do as a homemaker, wherever you're living, apartment, college dorm, cultivating your forever home. It's
Yeah.
important.
I think in your workplace, in your car too. I would probably forget to pray my rosary most days if I didn't see it hanging in my car. I'm just such a visual person. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. I forget about it. That's why I have so many sticky notes and 50 alarm reminders on my phone every single day because I would probably forget things otherwise.
Hmm. And that's even a great piece of advice. Put a reminder on your phone that goes off at a certain day to just think about eternity, think about heaven, think about the fact that all of this is hopefully leading towards that, if that's the desire of your heart, which it should be. I think we like to cultivate like more grandiose ways to be
Mhm.
Catholic sometimes, but having that reminder on your phone, I've done that for different prayers over the years that have ebbed and flowed, and it can be as simple as that.
I've even discovered on my phone with the Angelus that you can put your background, or at least on my phone, I have an Android, but the picture that shows up is the Angelus prayer. So I remember what the alarm is for instead of just having a name. So if it's a quote and you don't really have it memorized, but you just want something to remind you, like 2 o'clock every single day, I'm just gonna, or maybe it's not a quote, maybe it's a scripture verse that you want to learn how to memorize and it just pops up every day. You read it for 10 seconds and then you just swipe the alarm to the side. I think that's a really great way that we can internalize some of these things. I know that you shared you enjoy the temperaments, and I
I
love the
do.
temperaments. So anytime I get to talk with somebody about the temperaments, I want to talk about it. What has understanding your temperaments, or how has it helped you grow in virtue and maybe love others a little bit more freely?
When I first took the test, I was going out on mission for just a diocesan program, and it just was very validating to see the general characteristics that I had grown up acting out of.
Hmm.
And I actually just did a deep dive into it more recently because I think not only is it super important for self knowledge, but it's very helpful in your relationships with others to love people well, especially people who operate in a different way than you do. For example, I am phlegmatic and my husband is melancholic, and we both have very similar secondaries in different ways, but still not operating in that same mentality as your default. I kept thinking in plenty of circumstances, why is he acting this way? It doesn't make sense to me. And then doing a deep dive and realizing, oh, this is the way his brain is wired. This is the natural disposition of his heart. These are the ways that he is going to react in certain circumstances that I don't. So it's definitely made me, I think, slower to judge the people in my life, even if I don't know their temperament. We're not trying to put people in boxes, but it does really help to have that perspective and to check yourself instead of just judging people based on how you would act. And then personally, when I'm looking at myself, because of that side of me that is very slothful and struggles with that, that
Hmm.
is something that a lot of phlegmatics struggle with. It's just being called out is very important, especially as someone who is prone to inaction. It's really nice to be told, this is something you struggle with. You know that, but you need to be reminded of that. And being called higher just by knowing that about yourself can be very helpful. And knowing that sanctity isn't taking away who you are, it's deepening who you are and taking away the parts of you that aren't of God. And so we all have inclinations in one way or another. And Jesus was the perfect combination of all the virtues. And so we're just trying to become more of who we are in light of who he was and who he is.
For anyone who's joining for the very first time and you are not familiar with temperaments, there are four of them. So, choleric, sanguine, melancholic, and phlegmatic. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a higher probability that you are probably choleric or melancholic. But I have a client right now who is phlegmatic, and I'm so excited to have you here, Ava, because I'm not phlegmatic. My mother was very phlegmatic, so I grew up around that. And I certainly am not a person who likes confrontation, which is something phlegmatics try to avoid at all costs. They do not like high emotionally charged situations, and I don't always either. But it's just so fascinating to hear from people whose brains work very differently than your own. And I think that no matter what our temperament is, it can be difficult sometimes to see our own gifts, just like it's difficult to see some of our own blind spots. I would love to hear from you. And again, just because you are phlegmatic does not mean that every other phlegmatic has this exact same thing. I just want to make that clear. We are all unique beings, but we have certain tendencies, and that's where temperament comes from. It's how quickly you react to a stimulus and how long that reaction kind of lingers is really where temperament stems from. It is innate in you and it does not change over time. Your primary temperament is your primary temperament. However, as Ava mentioned, we learn to grow in the virtues of the other temperaments so that hopefully at the end of time we are like Jesus and can have all of the virtues and none of the vices. So, my question for you, Ava, is what are some of your phlegmatic superpowers? Like, what are the things that you feel like Because of my temperament, this is a gift that I have that people who don't have this temperament, it does not come as easily to them.
The first thing that came to mind is just being able to sit and listen to someone for a long time and just letting them process. I'm not as much of an external processor as other people might be, but I'm very content to just let them pour out their heart and process as they need to, whether they need just someone to listen or if they need someone to workshop something with them, because I'm less prone to, for me personally, at least, higher, quicker emotions. It's easier to just sit there and take someone in and not judge what they're going through and just let them share. And so, yeah, just being a better listener in that way. I think that's been something that's just throughout my life. I was always the person in the friend group that seemed to be dragged into the long conversations and the peace builder for sure, which is a gift, even if it can be difficult at times because you can't make everyone happy. So that's the first one that came to mind. I might have to come back and see if there's something else that comes up as we keep talking.
Yeah. Peacemakers, that's the first thing that I think of when I think of phlegmatics, especially if they are in a room with cholerics. Cholerics can be very blunt in what they say and don't always pick up on other people's emotions as quickly. And they can also just be a little more fueled by whatever is going on around them because they are quick to react. And that reaction lingers for a while. So they're a little more prone to anger. That's the opposing temperament of the phlegmatic, who phlegmatics don't like to ruffle people's feathers. They don't want to make waves. They are known as the peacemakers just because of that very fact. And so they really balance out people who have strong emotions. So definitely a gift. And out of that gift, being able to just listen and let other people process. You mentioned that sometimes slothfulness can be a temptation for you. And sometimes the phlegmatic gets labeled unfairly as the lazy temperament, which really is not true. That's just a temptation. It's a temptation to not be as active. Is there anything else that you've noticed as you've learned about temperaments, about yourself, that you're like, oh, this is an area I struggle with, and it might be caused by my temperament?
Well, going off of the slothfulness temptation, kind of on the other side, sometimes I have realized a lot of people struggle with scrupulosity. And
Mhm.
that is something that I absolutely do not struggle with because there is this freedom that I feel like I inherently have to know that some things just don't happen. Some things just don't get done. Some things you make a mistake and you move on. It's easy for me to just brush things aside and just go to the next thing, for myself at least. Be like, okay, that wasn't perfect. I didn't show up the best way there. Okay, tomorrow's a new day. Instead of ruminating on it too much or thinking that things that aren't actually sins that might have just been the temptation there, I don't get caught up in that. So that's been a grace. I have a lot of friends that are more melancholic leaning that struggle with scrupulosity to one degree or another. And I always think of Saint Therese in a lot of ways where, despite, I think she was melancholic, a
Yes.
lot of people say, but seeing how she rose above that and she, even if she might have had a temptation of scrupulosity, she definitely rose above that because she just knew that God was her salvation, that everything she did was through his grace and through his power, and it wasn't actually her. And so she might have had that temptation, but she was able to rise above it. And so I think of people like her for those who actually do have that struggle. But I've been, man, very grateful that that's not my struggle. It's actually using the time that I have well
Mm.
is usually my temptation. I wouldn't say that I'm not someone who's trying to think of the best way to describe it. As you said, there's the temptation to sloth. And so that can look different ways to different people. For me, it's often filling my day with things that aren't necessarily bad, but I still could use my time better. Maybe I'm using my time, filling it with podcasts, even spiritual podcasts, filling it with music, filling it with books, and not being present to my son as much as I could. There's always that temptation to do that, and there's always that fine line of encouraging him to play while also not ignoring him and not giving into my own desire for comfort and what I want in that moment. And balancing the temptation to just seek that comfort
Mm.
over, well, what's actually my responsibility in this moment? that's been something I've had to really struggle with is realizing that my gift to God and my gift to the people around me is to simply do what I'm supposed to do. It doesn't have to be glamorous. It doesn't have to look like an act of prayer. And oftentimes it's done without that heart disposition of prayer, but just
Mhm.
doing what you are supposed to do. That's something that sometimes I struggle with because it's just easy to do the fun thing in the moment. Or there's that book that's been sitting on my table the last half hour or so, and my son keeps bringing over his books to me instead. And so it's like, well, I guess I'm just reading this book for the 30th time this week. And that's the prayer of the moment.
Yeah. I love that you brought up some of those examples though, because regardless of our temperament, I think all of us struggle with some of those things that you just talked about at some point in time. It just looks different or our motivation looks different. So the sloth that you just talked about, I'm choleric and I still struggle with, oh my gosh, am I being so lazy? Or I go too far the other way where it's like so busy. Like you said, filling the day, but filling it with things that aren't necessarily what God's asking me to fill my day with. And it's good to know our temperament so we can look back at, okay, what is the motivation behind this? You use the word desire. Cholerics, their desire is control. So if there was a problem, they might look at the most efficient way to solve it and how directly can they solve it, like them personally, because they want to be in control of it. Whereas the melancholic, their desire is perfection. And so they want to do something the best way. And it can be very stressful because they put so much pressure on themselves to do it the best way. And then you've got the sanguine whose desire is fun, frills. Like, how can I make this the funnest that it can possibly be? And I don't really care if it gets done as long as I'm enjoying my time doing it, then great. And then you've got the phlegmatics, and their desire is peace. And sometimes peace means like I just go tuck myself in away in a corner with my book or my podcast, but
No, it's so
all
true.
beautiful things.
Yes.
And so again, our temperament is just a way to kind of recognize. And I know you love the saints, and I'll ask you if you have any favorite saints on self knowledge and spiritual growth. But self knowledge, St. Teresa of Avila is the one that always comes to my mind because she says we can never outgrow self knowledge. We always have to be immersed in it. And our temperament is just an entry point for self knowledge. It's a way of helping us to become aware. So this is not our identity. We have to be careful of not saying, well, I'm phlegmatic, so I'm not called to do this. And ironically, not ironically, I should say, this is God-given thing. Queen Esther has come up for the third time this week talking about phlegmatics because she was a phlegmatic. And if you aren't familiar with her story in the Bible, she does this very courageous act. And if you know the phlegmatic temperament, you know that this is not something that is natural. She's put in a situation where she has to be very bold, she has to be very courageous, and she has to seek out confrontation, which goes against her natural inclination. And if you need another phlegmatic to maybe call upon, St. Thomas Aquinas was also phlegmatic. So if you need an intercessor, for those of you whose primary temperament is similar to Ava's, that is a good one to call on. So, that being said, I would love to hear, do you have any particular saints that you enjoy for self knowledge?
I'm not sure if I would say that I call upon them or I think of them regarding this, but immediately St. Zilly Martin just came to mind.
Mm,
Because if you've read any quotes from her or her letters, they're very self knowledgeable. They're very just like, this is the trial that I have before me. This is the trial my family's going through. Why am I not doing what I'm supposed to? And obviously, she's a saint. So she still had the disposition of her heart that she desired the good and she desired God. But she still struggled in those everyday moments. So she's the first one that came to mind. I think she's become more and more relatable. People have discovered her in the last 10 or so years, especially whether you're a mom, whether you're a single person, whether you're a worker, or a combination of all of those. She's very relatable and seemed to have a good understanding of who she was and how God had made her.
yeah, I do love her for her relatability. Just like you said, one, she was a wife, and there aren't a ton of women saints who were wives, and she was a mom, and she was a worker. And so to just see all of those things in one person, I think can give us a lot of hope. And also to know she wasn't perfect. I mean, we read about Saint Therese and she had her tantrums when she was a child. And so we can look at that and be like, okay, our kids are going to have meltdowns.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that we're not good mothers.
And they're not beyond the realm of sanctity.
Absolutely. You were married on the Feast of Saint Therese, which maybe is part of the connection to your love for the Martin family. Her little way, I think you can kind of see in your work just in the way that you talk about editing during nap times and things like that. Are there any other ways that her spirituality kind of influences how you approach your vocation as a wife and a mom?
Yeah, Therese has been with me ever since I was born. My middle name is actually Therese. But it wasn't until I was in, I think about high school that I really started to cultivate a relationship with her. And it was actually through a book that Fulton Sheen wrote about her. It was actually a compilation of homilies he put together that were about her, I think leading up to her feast day one year. I know a lot of people think that she's just very flowery with her language and hard to relate to if that isn't your style. But she went through some really, really dark moments. I think a lot of people forget or don't know that the last year of her life or so, she barely felt any consolation from God, experienced the dark night of the soul, more or less, and really had to struggle with that as a fairly young person, knowing that she was going to meet her maker soon and clinging to that fact that she knew where she was going. She knew what she was desiring, which was heaven, even if she didn't feel the good feelings as she was approaching death. She might seem flowery, but she really knew the ache of the heart and the questioning that a lot of people go through when it comes to belief in God. She wasn't afraid to acknowledge that she didn't always feel confident in everything. She chose confidence, she believed it, but there wasn't always that feeling attached to it. There was that absence of God in her heart during that time. And I think a lot of people think that the saints always felt God was near. And that's really important for us to remember that they didn't.
Mhm.
And yes, they lived in a way that they chose to keep God near and they chose to remind themselves of him day in and day out, but that didn't mean that they felt it. And especially in a culture that puts so much on feelings, I think we need to remind ourselves of that a lot.
Mm, yes. Which just brings me to this thought. We put a lot of weight on feelings. We also put a lot of weight on productivity and on things like income. And the reason I bring that up is St. Therese was someone who was kind of behind the scenes, right? She was in the convent, she wasn't out in the world. And I think that sometimes as women, when we stay home, or even if we work, but we're not being paid for our work, we think that it doesn't have the same value as someone who is bringing in income, if that makes sense. And so I would just love to hear your perspective on how we can remind ourselves that that is not where our value comes from. That is not why we are loved. But if you just have any sort of framework or any thoughts on how we can just kind of root ourselves more deeply in that our worth doesn't come from those things. It doesn't come from how we feel. It doesn't come from what our job is, or even if we are stay at home moms and we say that we don't have a job. I think that is a job. It is a very hard job. But I just love to hear your thoughts on that particular topic.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's definitely something that in different ways has been on my mind lately, just with the change in seasons in life that I've been in the last couple years. I worked full time for 7, 8 years after college, and in that time got married and had our son, and I was working remotely, so I had the flexibility to have my son with me full time, and then he got older and things were getting harder, but even before I had to make that choice of what it looked like, God took me away from my job and just closed that door very clearly. And so then I was able to step into the state of just being a stay-at-home mom and loving on my son as best as I can while also having my own project on the side to keep that creative side of me, to keep that going. And I think realizing you mentioned, I think it was when you were talking about that 40 Weeks book and the
Mhm.
5 different themes was creation, one of them,
Yes.
meditating on that. Yeah. So God formed us because he wanted to. He created out of love, and that anything you do throughout your day that you are able to enter into that state of creativity. And that's very broad. It doesn't have to mean that you're an artist, but doing something to create, whether that's a meal, whether it's raking the leaves in your backyard to let your kid jump in it. I think people can think of the ways that they create day in, day out. And that is being a part of just who God created you to be. We are supposed to be co creators with Him. And every day has those opportunities. And that is way more part of our identity than productivity and quote unquote work that we define by a salary can ever be. A job and bringing money into a home is only in support of the lives that are there and the vocation that is there. And it's not the center of it. It's obviously important and there is great dignity in work, but it is not it is also the dignity of creativity there, being able to form something, whether that is through your hands or through your mind, through your presence. And so maybe just bringing it back to that simple theme of you are creating, and that is what God has started with. And that is what he's able to keep doing through you. And that is way more important.
That is beautiful. I'm going to take that to my prayer because just a new perspective and a new lens to look at creativity, not just how the Lord created and continues to create, but how we co create with Him. And for people who feel like they're not creative, just like you said, there are different avenues. Creativity looks different. For some people, it's the incredible way that they can make lists. There are people who are so organized at list making and creating planners and a flow for their family life, and they're very organized and detailed, and that is not a gift that the artist always has. The artist, their space may be very chaotic if you walk into it, but they create beautiful artwork or beautiful music, and so recognizing that creation looks different in each of us, but we are invited into it. And sometimes that creativity, the fruit of it might be your own peace of mind, your ability to be present with your little one or with your spouse. It might be the ability to create a home so that when your loved one comes home from work, it is a space where they can decompress from the thing that they did to bring in the income. And that is significantly valuable, even though the paycheck didn't come through you. You created a space where your husband was able to go back out into his job and do it again and again every day without losing his mind. And so it looks different for each of us, but I think just remembering that different doesn't mean less valuable.
Amen. Even going back to what we were talking about with keeping eternity in mind, money will not come with us to eternity. We know that. We know that.
Mhm.
But creativity, I think we can say would, because God is always creating. We don't know what heaven's like, but I think we can assume that there is going to be a level of God's creativity even in heaven, because why would he stop being who he is? He is the creator.
Mm.
Um, and so if that's also written in our hearts, I think there would be a level of creativity even in us in heaven, whether that's just how we adore and worship him in heaven will be infinitely creative because we're there with him and we are seeing more and more. So that is something that starts here that would tie into eternity that a job and a salary would never be able to do.
Mm. I want to look at this from one more perspective too, because you are an editor. You write as well, but primarily editing in this moment. And that sometimes I think can be more behind the scenes. And so I've heard this from women, sometimes from clients, sometimes just in conversation. They feel like they aren't as valuable even in their parishes because they aren't the people who are organizing the whole event or doing all of the outward things. They see the people who are speaking, who are more of like those upfront face people. and they're more behind the scenes. And I would love to just hear from your perspective what happens if the editor doesn't do the behind the scenes work, just to give us a tangible visual of what it looks like when those behind the scenes people aren't there.
Yeah. The people that work behind the scenes in one way or another, I guess you could say they help make the event or the product, they clean it up in a way that a lot of the people experiencing it when the finished product is there just wouldn't know. It's really just giving it a fine tuning that makes it more approachable for people, more easily understood, more engaging. And so, for any listener out there, whatever that looks like of how you're supporting the kingdom behind the scenes, it's a great work to have. You're definitely doing what you're called to do, even if it's not out in the spotlight. Because, yeah, at the end of the day, it's not about what's seen as much as just doing what you're called to do. And if you have a gift that is useful to help events and products come out to the world in a way that wouldn't happen without it, then that is beautiful.
And I think utilizing those gifts that also play into our temperaments. So for the sanguine who maybe is really creative, but they're not great at finishing, but they have an editor saying, "Hey, are you going to get this in?" And then you might be the person who helps get it actually on the platform or out in the world versus that person, me being that person sometimes. It's like I'll get it on paper and then it doesn't ever make it anywhere else. So I need people to help me stay on track sometimes or just set the deadline and be the reminder. So all of our gifts are unique and we are not created to be all of the parts of the body. We are a part of the body. So love the gift that you have, love the temperament that you have. You have the temperament that God gave you for a reason. And if you ever have thoughts, because this does happen quite often, of I don't have the right temperament for the thing that God's asking me to do, you're wrong. And I say that in the most loving way.
No, that's a great thing to bring up because God can use you despite any of your quote unquote insufficiencies. He will always give you the grace to rise to any task and any call of your heart. It does then end up being whether you respond to it or not, but that doesn't mean that you are limited just because your natural disposition would drag you a different way.
Amen. So on Caeli Catholic, what kind of things have you been editing lately? What kind of stories can people find when they go there?
I feel like we've had a few related to feast days lately, which has been a lot of fun. I always love hearing different reflections about feast days. We had one about the guardian angels and actually thinking about your guardian angel throughout the day and calling upon your guardian angel. And then today, the day we're recording, is the Feast of Our Lady of Champion, which is the U.S. apparition that took place up in Wisconsin. And just how Mary's call to young Adelbreeze was bringing back a call of her heart from her younger years and bringing it to fulfillment in a way that she could never have anticipated, and how our mother champions us. So I love anything feast day related because there's always a feast day on the calendar.
Mhm.
But then we also have a lot of reflections of, yeah, just the day to day or the different vocations that different women are in and how they're encountering God in those seasons and the revelations that he's putting on their heart.
Can you think of anything that you've read recently from an article, it could have been somewhere else, that's really helped you deepen your prayer life?
Mm. The article about the guardian angels did actually really push me to pray to my guardian angel more. It's one thing to pray the guardian angel prayer at the end of your rosary or whenever you think about it, and we all should. But then even just the author, Rosie, she was talking about how she was discerning religious life and lived in a convent for a few years, and how normal it was for other religious sisters to just ask their guardian angel to remind them of what they forgot to do earlier that day or what they were trying to tell the other sister. And I've definitely found myself asking my guardian angel to remind me of things or help me to not forget because I often forget to even put things on the to-do list. And so they don't get done. And just you have that little act of asking your guardian angel to don't let me forget this. I've been a lot more on top of the little things that would slip through the last week or so since I edited that. So that's been a gift.
I feel like I've heard this a couple different places, and maybe you've heard it too, or you can correct me if I'm wrong. But your guardian angel is more powerful than Satan himself because your guardian angel is still with the Lord. And that's something that's really incredible to think about. Our human nature cannot compete with Satan because of original sin and just how we are. But God is so much bigger than that. And having our guardian angel there specifically for us, like each of us has a guardian angel who is designated to us. And to have them at our side and to not utilize them. In my mind, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's crazy. Why do I not call upon my guardian angel more? And I'm guessing my son maybe heard something at mass, but he came to our prayer time the other night and it was just me and him. And he's like, Mom, what do you want to ask your guardian angel to help you with? And I thought, okay, let me think about it. He goes, maybe you should ask him to help you be more consistent in getting up for your prayer time in the morning. And I was like, oh my goodness, how did you know that I have been struggling with that so much this fall? Because we've been getting to bed really late with sports activities and I get up really early to try to pray. And I've just been struggling. And he's like, I think that you should ask for that. And he said, I'm going to ask my guardian angel to get up earlier as well because he wanted more time to play. And I will tell you what, that kid has been up early every day since so he could play his Legos. Been waking up on his own before I ever make it to his room. And I have had much more success getting up as well. So don't discount your guardian angel. Be very specific and just like you do in prayer, ask repeatedly, but it's a life hack worth following.
For sure.
All right. As we get a little closer to closing, I'm curious what living in the light of eternity looks for you right now in this particular season, just to go full circle to how we started.
I think the biggest thing is really leaning into motherhood. My son is 18 months old, so things are changing all the time. And it's really easy to get into my own routine and then have it shift really quickly, but constantly reminding myself that he is a soul. He's not a doll. He's not a robot. He's not what I want him to be. He is his own unique person that God wanted to be here and wants for all of eternity. And reminding myself that is probably one of the most important things I can do every day and just be present to him and love him and encounter him and try not to get frustrated when things don't go as planned, especially when it's not chosen necessarily by him. He's too young to sin. He's just acting out of experiencing everything new for the first time. But you can extend that to the other people around you. Everyone's a soul and they're loved and beloved by God and wanted by him for all of eternity. So that's been the biggest thing I've had as a reminder. My son is my reminder.
If we can remember that with every human that we interact with, the world would be a much better place. And we would have a lot less things to take to confession.
True. Very true.
Where can everyone find you? I know you just started a new Substack. How do people access that and where your writing and your editing is located?
hmm Yeah. So Caeli Catholic is I'm the editor of, and it's primarily, well, it's all women writers at this point. Though now that we're on Substack, I'm open to expanding a little bit, but I especially have a heart for women Catholic writers and just encouraging each other on this journey to heaven. So you can find us on Substack at Caeli Catholic. And I was on Instagram for Caeli. Haven't really had much interaction over there lately, focusing on just the articles and just keeping it. That's where the heart of it is. I'm also on Instagram at Ava Waller, but also not as active as I used to be. So mostly just the Substack.
Who knows? You might come back to Instagram. I go through spurts where I'm not on there for a very long time and then I'll be active when other parts of my life slow down. And I think that's okay. I think that that is growth and virtue when we are able to set those things down and not live by them and say, you know what, this is okay. This is not the right season for that. It is a season to write. It is a season to be a mom or whatever it is that the Lord puts on your heart for that period in time. So I appreciate that you are willing to step away and the world is going to keep turning, even if we don't show up in all of the places where culture tells us that we need to show up to be successful.
Exactly. We think we need to be out there and sharing our own thoughts all the time. And maybe this is a little weird way to say it as an editor, but I do prefer sharing other people's thoughts than my own sometimes and elevating other people's voices other than my own. Because I feel like sometimes when I start sharing my own thoughts too much. Like, no, I'm just trying to show up and perform instead of actually just be where God's calling me to be. So if you feel that way too, don't feel afraid to step back and just limit what you are, the noise you're listening to, even the good noise. It's good to step back occasionally and treat it as a little retreat once in a while, even.
Amen. My last question for you before we close, I always ask my guests to share either a prayer tip or a scripture verse. Do you have anything that comes in mind for this particular audience?
Something I've been doing ever since, I think, college. I had a priest tell me in confession that I should pray for the Pope every day, and I wasn't at the time. And so one thing I've just done, he said, just pray for the Pope every time you make your bed, which is also good for someone who didn't make their bed as much. So I just pray in Our Father, a Hail Mary, and a Glory Be every morning while I'm making the bed for our Holy Father. And it helps me pray nearly first thing in the morning. And so even if the rest of my routine in my day gets out of hand, I've almost always at least done that. And our Holy Father always needs our prayers.
Absolutely. And tying it to something that you are already doing or something that you're aspiring to doing is so significant. It's a way that we work towards praying without ceasing because that's how habits are built. And if you already have something that is part of your day and you simply add prayer, then it's just that much greater. It's that offering everything, even the little things. And amazing that you make your bed every day because I do not. And I think part of that is I get out of my bed before my husband does. So it's not really possible to make my bed unless I come back later. Maybe that's something I can add to my plan of life as I continue on. I would like to. It's nice to go into a bed that's already made.
I never appreciated it when I was younger, but I've come to like it a lot.
It's also an act of self-discipline. It really is, and we can never have too much of that in our lives, I feel like, at least not me. It's an area I'm constantly working on, so offering that to God and that little bit of obedience. So amazing. You took something from confession, and here you are years later. Priests are amazing. Go to
They are.
confession. Listen to your priest.
Yes.
Thank you, Ava, so much for being here. It's been a blessing, and everyone be sure to go check out Caeli Catholic.
Thanks, Kylie. This was great.
Beautiful souls, thank you again for journeying with me. If you have been blessed by this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your social media stories, and don't forget to tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Caeli M. Hine. Stay persistent in prayer, protect your peace, and as always, share the light of Christ with everyone around you.